Welcome to Wind Down with Kev. So excited to be kicking off season 5. So excited to be doing it here in Atlanta, Georgia. Thank you for those of you that have waited for me to kick this season off. I appreciate your patience, but I didn't want to do it until I was in the right place with the right guests. So everything is always about timing. And today that happened. So today I am in Atlanta, Georgia, in the Creators Clubhouse, and I have an incredible guest. Those of you that are in the insurance industry, he needs no introduction. I'll get to that in a second. But those of you that are in other professions, entrepreneurs in other fields, if you don't know his name already, you want to get to know his game. I actually posted about his book on yesterday, but this is a man that once I bring him on camera and on mic is someone you want to follow beyond the questions that I can come up with today. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to some and present to others, Mr. Greg. Greg.
They're very good. What's going on, Kev?
Everything is good. Everything is good. Thank you for taking time out of your day. Meet me here at the studio so we can do this podcast together. We've been hanging out a lot lately.
So New York. In fact, we've been hanging out for a few years.
Yes.
But I have to tell you, it's very cool to be on the season premiere of season 5. So, because not everybody gets a chance to say that. So thank you for having me in the space for that. I appreciate that.
I'm just happy our time lined up. So we were together in New York 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Correct.
We touched base on Saturday, and you said, "What's up, Kev, from Fairbanks, Alaska?"
I was in Fairbanks, Alaska. As a matter of fact, I was in St. Simon's Island first, and then Fairbanks, and then back to Atlanta. It was a 4-day trip. It was just about 11,000 miles.
My
11,000 miles, yeah.
So Greg, and people watching, so I don't want to embarrass myself. So Greg hit me back by text. He said, "What's up, Kev, from Fairbanks, AK?" And I knew it was Alaska, but I lost a little confidence. So I had to look it up just to be sure. But Alaska.
Yeah. Well, I had to look it up before I texted it too. So that's fair. That is fair. It's not Fairbanks, Arkansas. It was definitely Fairbanks, Alaska.
That was my dilemma. That was my dilemma. So, Greg, what took you to Fairbanks and what you took to the island? Tell the people a little bit about what you do, how long you've been doing it.
Well, so September actually makes 30 years for me to be doing this thing that I do that I still struggle, quite frankly, to describe. So in a nutshell, I have a leadership development, sales, and service training firm. And so my office pretty much is the Atlanta Hartsfield Airport. That's pretty much where I hang out most times. And so it has taken me from coast to coast in this country, 49 out of 50 states. I think I even mentioned in New York, everywhere from Shreveport to Sri Lanka. And it's been a wonderful ride because what I get a chance to do is help people navigate through those sometimes more difficult situations, whether it's sales or service or leadership or relationship building. There's another book I have that's called Dad from a Distance, which is also about non-custodial fathers and navigating that space. So I'm just everywhere. So I actually happen to be in Fairbanks at the invitation of the Allstate agent that has the northernmost, he told me this, I want to make sure I get this right, Chris Maroc, the northernmost exclusive agency in the United States. It's at latitude 65.
Wow.
So he had seen me before, as many people have different seminars where I've been traveling around. And they had a small business summit. And I got a phone call that said, "Greg, how would you like to come to Fairbanks and present at this summit?" And I said what I normally said. "What date?"
Yes.
And that's how we ended up there. So.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah.
So, Greg, we're going to talk about insurance. We're going to talk about your book. But when you mentioned your other book about non-custodial fathers, I couldn't help but notice that the inflection in your voice changed. Talk a little bit about that book and why that's important to you.
Well, first of all, it's my story.
Okay.
And what I figured out first of all, there's no real game plan or no book for being a parent anyway. That's just the thing. And anybody that becomes a parent figures it out pretty much immediately. But I found myself in a situation where I was in a divorce and I had a daughter, it's 5 years old at the time. And I was bound and determined not to be that guy, that picture that's painted of, the uninvolved father disappearing. I didn't know my dad growing up and all those type of things. And so I was really on a mission to make sure that I did the right things. And so I actually wrote the book when she graduated from Jacksonville University. So it was a look back over 16 years about the things I did well, the things I didn't do so well. And I have to tell, Danielle is the daughter in question. I have to tell you, she wrote the foreword to the book.
Outstanding.
And I still, to this day, believe that's the best part of the book. People cannot read her foreword without just tears just flowing down their face.
I couldn't help notice the change in inflection in your voice, and it's palpable because it impacted me as well, and I even hear it as you talk about it. Now, you mentioned you're the father of 3 daughters. Is Danielle the daughter that's in Miami, or is Danielle locally?
So Danielle is local.
Okay.
Yes, and so we talk 5 times a week at least. I was talking to her just before I came in to the studio, and I have a lot of passions, and I thought the first book I was going to write, Kev, was going to actually be the business book, the one that you read. Mm-hmm. But it turned out not to be the case. It turned out that book, once I started, and I'm very analog, so they didn't teach us how to type when I was in high school, right? So I had a legal pad, and then over the course of about 6 weeks, my fingers were cramping. I could not stop writing.
Yes.
And that was the genesis of that book, and a whole series of workshops and stuff I've done. I don't talk about that much because that's not really the revenue side of my world.
Right.
But it is absolutely the passion part of that world. So you figure, traveling as much as I do, I was going to be a dad from a distance anyway.
Right.
So it was 2 times over. So making sure that worked well was always really important to me.
I love it. I love it. So we got a lot of stuff that we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
I want to start right at the top. So I've just rebranded my podcast. The name Wind Down with Kev. I started my podcast back in 2020. It was kind of therapy for me as a way to get through the pandemic. I, like you, not 49 states, not 40 countries, unlike you, I used to do a lot of networking and a lot of local speaking.
Right.
And suddenly my birthday in 2020, March 16, 2020, when the world stopped.
Wow. That's like exactly the day the world stopped.
That is the date. That's the date. I'm sitting in my office at home, and I'm looking at a whiteboard with nothing on it and nothing to do.
Wow.
And a person I was working with at the time suggested, why not start a podcast? And I said, what's a podcast? I said, well, Kevin, if it's socially important to talk to people, you just do it online. So
right.
That's how it started. Fast forward this year, I've rebranded the podcast to be called the Dream Chaser Podcast, specifically to speak to a lot of young entrepreneurs, even mature entrepreneurs like you and I, that no matter what we've done in the past, we're still chasing new dreams. There's always more to do.
Sure.
So that being said, you're working on new things. So talk about the dream that you're chasing today.
So the dream that I'm chasing today, it's funny, out of chaos comes opportunity.
Yes.
I really believe that. And in my speaking business, it's everyone that works in sales understands a pipeline and how a pipeline works. And that's how my speaking business had been for 27 years. I do a gig. Somebody says, I saw this guy. I get a phone call. It's, are you ready? Are you available for November 12th? Yeah. And it just goes, right? And then the pandemic happened. In fact, the reason I know March 16th specifically is because I had flown back from Texas where my agency was, and I decided not to fly back to Texas the next day just because I thought something was going to be, go weird, and it did. And so within a week, I had gotten probably 12 calls from clients that were canceling conferences. And if people go to my website eventually, they'll see what that means to me when you get 12 calls that, we're not doing it. And I was like, I ended up much like you. I'm sitting at home now trying to figure out how this thing works. And then I realized that there was so much of an opportunity to be able to communicate and train and teach online. And I started getting better at that. But when you and I met first, it was always in-person things. And I love that, except that if Kevin came to one of my seminars back in the day that a company sponsored, well, it worked well if you didn't have 3 people call out sick.
Yes.
Or you were there, but you hired someone 2 weeks later and they missed the show.
Yes.
So putting all that together, I said, let me try to find a way to make myself available to people, a much broader group of people, agents and staff. And so Greg Gray on Demand was born.
Yes.
And so we've actually just gotten it off the ground in the last couple of weeks. That's why this is so timely. And I really appreciate getting a chance to talk about it. But people are just going bananas over this thing. So I get a chance to speak to you, and you've done some online coursework, and you're doing some more of that now. But now I can go into as much depth as I want to without the time constraints of this conference or this agenda or, this particular platform live. And it's awesome because now I can talk to the brand new employee. I can talk to the employee that maybe, I remember that, but I've kind of gotten out of my game. And it's really going crazy, and it's actually kind of exceeding my expectations.
I'm happy for you, and I'm happy for all of my insurance agents and peers throughout the country that get to utilize your services, even from afar, because you're one man, you could be in one place, but getting into the on-demand space, which I shared earlier, that's my next venture, is learning how to do more things online as opposed to always being there. Certainly that's an outgrowth of the pandemic. So let's talk about your book for a second.
Okay.
Your book is a business book, but people, listen to me and trust me when I say it's hilarious. We use the word pandemic because that's something we all experience collectively.
Right.
But you introduced a word in your book that's a place that many people have experienced called pathetica.
Pathetica.
Talk about pathetica. Talk about pathetica.
So pathetica is that place where, and it happens to a lot of leaders. So what tends to happen really to the majority of us is that we are kind of doing the rank and file job and we're killing it. I mean, we're knocking it out. And an opportunity comes up for us to do something different, bigger, to supervise a team or manage a team. And I would say it's probably safe to say that 9 out of 10 people are actually being selected for leadership roles, not because of their leadership prowess, but because they did the job that they are being hired to lead and did it really well.
Yes.
And so, which is kind of the birth of micromanagement, by the way. So you hired me not because I'm a leader, but because I did the job well. You want me to make everybody do it the way I did it.
Yes.
And so I got hired as a supervisor in a call center, and pathetica is what I call that time because I did not have any idea how clueless I was. Now, and I say this in the book, I had a leader's heart, but I didn't have a leader's toolbox. And if all you have is leader's heart, you find that you're trying to will people to do things all the time. And there's just not enough human energy to do that. So many of us have spent time in pathetica. In fact, some of us moved out of pathetica and then moved back into the neighborhood with a new job. And then we moved out of pathetica and moved back. But it talks about that place where we are really humbled and understand that we could really be better in terms of just the nuts and bolts of leadership.
I tell you, one thing that resonated with me, you talked about in the book, you're leading with a heart. You approach someone, you ask them to do a task, and they simply refuse.
Yes, insubordination.
Yes.
So that is part of one of the courses I teach is why people aren't doing what you want them to do and what you can do about it. And most leaders, in this part of the seminar, I ask people, how many reasons do you think there are? And most people come up with maybe 5 or 6 reasons. Sometimes you'll hear 7 or 8 reasons, but for the most part, 5 or 6 reasons. Well, there's actually 15 different reasons people aren't doing what we want them to do.
Okay.
One of the ones that everybody always gets, though, is just, I ain't gonna do it, right? And it's funny, because when you're a leader, all of us have known people that have done that. In fact, some of us even did that at some point in time. But the first time you as a leader say, I want you to do this, and someone just goes toe to toe with you and says, I ain't doing that.
Right.
It's almost like you're in some kind of real weird avant-garde theater, with lights and all this stuff going on. And I didn't know what to do with them.
Right.
But we teach people what to do. Look, if Kev says he ain't gonna do it, every HR manual says, progressive discipline up to and including termination, dismissal, whatever it is. But what I didn't realize is that the way I was dealing with that had not just to do with that guy, but my whole team was watching. So I mentioned this, I think this comes up in the book, that most leaders don't realize that 90% of their team meetings, the leader's not present.
Right.
So if I handle that poorly, that guy that was insubordinate is going to call a meeting with my team and say, hey, don't worry about it. I don't do it. Ain't nothing happened to me. Nope. Be fine. Just tell them you ain't going to do it.
That's it.
And then the team starts to disintegrate. So, yeah, that was a punch in the throat, as Mike Tyson would say. Yeah,
definitely a punch in the throat. My favorite Mike Tyson quote is, "Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face."
Until they get punched in the face. Yes.
So Greg, I'm going to draw some connectivity between our insurance world that we share and a lot of my audience. In the past 3 years, a lot of online entrepreneurs have started podcasting, or this business venture or that business venture, and they've had great success. And as a result of success comes growth and the need to hire and lead people.
Yep.
Unfortunately, while building their massive influence, there aren't a lot of guides or books written like yours to tell them how to build a team and create that team of leaders so it can work even when they're not there.
Right. Well, and it's kind of like being a parent, right? It looks pretty good until you are one, and then you're going, okay, this kid just peed on me, and I don't know what to do about that, right? So, and by the way, there's a lot of parallels to that as a business person, entrepreneur as well. But that's what the path of that book is about, because what happens is you can have pretty meteoric growth right out of the gate, but then you get big and you realize you don't have processes that are scalable. You don't have the right amount of scaffolding to be able. So that meteoric rise can crumble right in front of you, and it's much harder to build back up. And then you add to that, you kind of need to have the right people, not just someone who's breathing. And a lot of times we don't hire. I know a lot of my insurance friends, we haven't mentioned it, but I had an insurance agency, as I said, in New York for about 15 minutes, right?
What was that experience like for you?
It was, after having spoken to somewhere around 8,000 or 9,000 agents over the last 15 or 20 years, I felt like after that experience, I needed to go on an apology tour.
Okay.
Because Kevin Spann would have been in my audience 5 years ago, and I would be talking about all these great things to do, and Kevin would be looking at me like, Greg, but and just being kind about it.
Right.
And then I hired someone on a Wednesday to start on a Monday, and they didn't show up.
Yes, ghosted.
And I'm going, what just happened here? And I'm now up at 4 o'clock in the morning, at 3 o'clock, or sometimes 2 o'clock, not trying to figure out how I'm going to grow the business. I'm just saying, I hope everybody shows up to work tomorrow.
Yes.
And so I've kind of likened it to going to graduate school for the training that I do for insurance agents, because it is giving me a perspective that I had empathy for before, but it's deeper than that. And so, it scarred me. I'm not gonna lie to you. I took some bumps and bruises, but I now understand a little bit better. And that's really the key for entrepreneurship, is that whether you're an insurance agent or anyone else, is you kind of have to know the people you're serving, and you don't have to do everything they do, but you have to be smart enough to be a student of what they do. And so that's really where the benefit was for me.
No, I love it. And I think you dealt with it very good in the book. So just for connectivity purposes, I was a sales leader before I became a sales agent.
Right.
And after about 3 months of being an agent, I owed all my agents an apology. I was teaching them how to win contests, but I didn't know the nuts and bolts of how it was put together. But fast forward to today, not only running my agency, but coaching agents through Craig Wiggins and doing some of my own initiatives. The second part of your book, the solutions component, all the things, the importance of evaluating the staff, having clear, consistent, written down goals of what I expect of you, what you can expect from me. Those things are everything. So this is a conversation. We're filming this in November now as we business plan for the next year. That's a big deal, because very few people have formal job descriptions, formal policy performance review processes.
Sure. And having that kind of infrastructure is important, because you can have a year of that infrastructure, but if you do it the right way, it's not just for a year, it's for the second week in November. That goal translates to you doing this the second week in November. And so having clear expectations, making sure people understand the impact of their behavior. Sometimes we just tell people to do stuff, and if they ask us why, we'll say, well, because I pay you. That's why you do it. But I learned a really, really cool lesson from a lady who runs a restaurant called the Angus Barn that I think I mentioned in the book. And one of the things she told me that has always stuck with me is that she said most restaurant owners, entrepreneurs, develop their staff to be good employees. She said, I figured out that I need to develop my staff to be great restaurant owners.
Yes.
Because if I do that and they understand the background of what's going on, they will make decisions that are much closer to my decision, the ones that I would make, and they think with a bigger picture. And that just always stuck with me. But that means I need to be a really good communicator.
Yes.
So I know a lot, as do you, a lot of agents that have a fantastic employee handbook, and no one's looked at it in the last 4 years.
No.
And if you ask the agent what's in it, they may not know.
No.
And if you ask the staff what that paragraph means, they don't know. I just signed it because you told me I had to sign it because that's how I get a job. But it makes the point that it is always evolving. That conversation of why we do what we do is important, is everything. It's absolutely everything.
No, I definitely agree with that. So I want to tap into, we have a lot of young entrepreneurs that are going to watch this podcast. We have a couple that are in the room with us. One launching a photography business, another one launching a social media business.
Yep.
And one of the things that young entrepreneurs struggle with that you had a great answer to is just setting their pricing.
Yeah.
And you had some great conversations about how you handle when someone points out that, Greg, I was looking for a speaker or a trainer, but I noticed that you were higher than the other person I found online.
Yes. In fact, there was a very specific instance. We talked about that in New York, and a pretty large company was hiring me for a particular engagement, and I told them what my fee was. And their response was, well, Greg, that's a lot more expensive than the other folks we're looking at. And my response was, yeah, it is. And I just left it at that. And I think that response caught them so off guard because, imposter syndrome is a real thing for entrepreneurs, especially young entrepreneurs. I was one, so I get it. And you're afraid that if I don't charge the right amount, no one will hire me, and then I'll go broke and I'll have to move back in with my parents. I mean, just all the nightmare scenarios. But the real effort should be toward, first of all, making sure you're actually worth what you're charging.
Yes.
And then to do it unapologetically.
Yes.
Because everybody is not your customer.
Yes.
I have a marketing firm that I'm now working with and you have a really smart marketing team as well, because you also figure out that there are other people that can do things better than you.
Yes. That's
another thing that I would say to young entrepreneurs and some seasoned entrepreneurs, because the first thought when it comes to hiring someone else is that means I'm cutting my own personal paycheck.
No.
And with growth in business, it's always an ebb and a flow. You invest and then you receive. You invest and you receive. And sometimes we don't grow because we get to the point where we're afraid of making that additional investment. Well, I'm not going to hire anybody. I'll give you a quick example. So when I first started doing this 30 years ago, I was getting paid $500 for a half-day training and $750 for a full-day training. I was doing contract work with the U.S. Postal Service. There was about 10 of us that were part of this little thing. So I met up with one of the guys that was part of that probably about 15 years later, a guy named Art Berg. Met him here in Atlanta. And he said, let's go have lunch. He said, because I have something in the morning, have something in the evening. It's from Utah.
Okay.
So we're sitting there, and he said, well, how much are you charging, Greg? I was like, well, about $1,500, and I was scared to say that because I was like, that's twice as much as what it was before. He said, you're not charging enough.
Okay.
I said, well, what do you mean? He said, I'll tell you what I mean. He said, so I've got a gig with a real estate company in the morning and then with a medical firm in the afternoon. And when I get back on the plane, I'm taking $30,000 home with me.
Let's go. That makes it a nice plane ride.
Yes. And I said, and he said, and you were better than I was.
Wow.
And I said, well, how did you get to that point? He said, what I learned was that there are some companies that are not going to hire a $1,500 speaker because that's risky for them. They don't want a $1,500 speaker. Even if you're great, if your price tag is $1,500 and they're used to hiring $15,000 speakers, they're not hiring you. No matter, they're not looking and saying, man, we're saving a lot of money on this cat, right? No. So it is about knowing what's going on in the market, but also putting in the work so that when someone says you're more expensive than everybody else, you can say, yeah, I am. Yeah. And I need you to tell me now whether you're going to hire me, because my phone's ringing right now. So right. Are we doing this? I'm sorry, we can circle back next year, I guess.
How long did it take from him sharing that wisdom with you, one conversation, for you to shift your mindset and really add a zero to what you were charging?
Well, first of all, about, I'd say 90 seconds.
Nice.
But it's what he said, because, we were talking about family earlier. Mm-hmm. Entrepreneurship, if it's done the way it can be done, part of what it gives you is freedom.
Yes.
And if it doesn't give you freedom, it's not entrepreneurship. It means you hired yourself to do a job.
Yes.
And what he told me, because I asked him, how did you when did you make these decisions, right? And he said, anytime I figured out that I was traveling too much and away from home too much, I raised my fee. That was his whole thing.
I like
that. I said, well, didn't you lose customers when you raised your fee? He said, yeah, but I was charging more, so I was still. He said, and every time I moved up, there were people that said, Greg, I wish I could have hired you, but you're too much. But then there's a whole nother group of people that now show up. So every time, it all came down to the freedom that he wanted to have with his family. And so when he was traveling too much, he raised his fee. And he did that to the point where it was $15,000 for 45 minutes. Now, I'm not there yet.
Yes.
But you might want to hire me soon.
Yes.
If that's an issue for you. I'm just saying.
Today's price
yes,
and yesterday's price.
That is correct. This price
Get
is not
at
guaranteed.
Greg on demand right now. I love it, Greg. I love it. Yeah. I love it. I love it. I think we've given a lot of jewels and a lot of wisdom to not only young people, new entrepreneurs listening to this, but also inspiring people that have been in the business as long as we have. Yeah. Greg, what haven't I asked you? What haven't I asked about you that you're working on right now that you love to talk about?
Well, not so much what I'm working on, because there's always, it's always evolving. The thought that I had when you asked that last question is something that I think is worth sharing to the folks that are listening. And that is that choose something. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, choose something where your heart lives, not where your head lives.
Yes.
And I say that because money is where your head lives, but you are not going to always make money as an entrepreneur. There's going to be a whole lot of stuff that you are not going to make money doing.
Clip that right there. I know that's right.
Absolutely. So the metric that I would encourage, especially entrepreneurs of any stripe, do you love it enough that if you hit the lottery tomorrow, you would still do it? Because your head will make you quit when your heart will keep you going. So that's what I would leave. That is probably the most important thing, because my heart is what I'm doing right now. And people say, how do you travel so much? Almost 3 million miles. I was like, I love it. I love it. And that's what you should be saying.
Yeah.
Even if it's hard.
Yes.
Because if it's hard, this too shall pass.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's it.
Yes, it will. That's a big thing. There's a Harvard study years ago that reinforces exactly what you just said. People that pursue career paths for money, people that pursue careers for passion. 20 years later, the people that went after the passion, they were happier and they had more money, because these people that were chasing the bag, they quit 10, 15 times and they changed looking for another bag, looking for another bag.
And they spend in the bag trying to be happy. So even the extra money they got, they ran out of it. So
overcompensating from being miserable for 40 hours, trying to be happy and doing some extracurricular things in an hour or two. So Greg, you're the father of 3 girls. I'm the father of 3 young men. Hashtag Girl dad. Talk
Yeah.
about your girls. I think I read in your bio that you raised some student athletes and
Yes. So all of them are athletes. So our oldest daughter, because we're in a blended family, and I say that just for
everybody
definitive
else
purposes.
that's out there in the blended family.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the oldest girl went to Howard University on a softball scholarship. The youngest, Danielle, went to Jacksonville University on a basketball scholarship. And probably the one that was most talented athletically, Alicia, the middle kid, was probably most naturally talented of all of them. But she, right around 11th grade, said, and this is having girls, this is where girls are different. In 11th grade, she said, I don't want to do this no more. And that was the whole thing.
Yes.
Now, there's people in this room right now in the podcast. I'm looking over. They are laughing because they get it. It's like, this just don't do nothing for me anymore.
Yep.
But what I do realize is that I am attending a school from which I will never graduate.
Yes.
By having 3 daughters. But I will also tell you that I have no more fierce defenders on this planet than those 3 girls.
I love it.
And it's because, not because of what I did with them when they're teens or in college, because most of the raising is done with kids by the time they're 4, 5, 6 years old.
That's it.
But it is 3 of my favorite words are "that's my daughter."
Ooh.
Those are really about my 3 favorite words.
That's a jewel right there.
Yeah.
That's my daughter with pride.
That's my daughter. Absolutely.
With pride. And
Yep.
for a couple of words for everyone that he dropped out there, he talked about blended families, the book, Custodial Dad. That's my daughter.
Yep. That's
Those
my
are
daughter.
jewels right there. Somebody that's watching this right now is struggling in all of those areas and needs to rekindle relationships or need to the encouragement that what they're doing is the right thing. So this is all about helping people.
Sure.
Talking about your journey, not mine. I love it, Greg. I think we touched a lot of topics. Tell the people where they can find you online. Tell them about your books, where they can find you, follow you, and keep up with you as you chase your next dream of Greg Gray on demand.
Outstanding. So the easy thing is that my website is extraordinarily self-involved, but it's easy to remember.
I got you.
It's greggray.com, GREGGRAY.com. The cool thing is that there's so much happening in my world in the insurance space is that if you go to greggray.com, all the agents will find there's a little link at the top that says for insurance agents.
Yes.
Is that big a part of my business that it actually has an exit ramp where it talks about me coming out to visit, as we talked about just before the podcast, going out to visit with agents, the online training, all those types of stuff. It's my virtual brochure, So greggray.com is where everything is happening.
I love it. Everything is there. They get to greggray.com. They could also find a link and get to your books and everything
Absolutely. The whole 9 yards. One-stop shop. Got to make it easy.
There it is. Easy. Your name is straightforward. Easy to spell. If not, it's right there on the bottom.
Yep.
Pick it up. Follow this brother. He excels at what he does inside the insurance space, outside the insurance space, in the family space, the personal space, the entrepreneur space. This is somebody that I want you to get to know, especially all my dream chasers out there. If you want to chase your dream, and learn from someone that's did it the hard way, did it the right way, and is still chasing a new dream today, follow greggray.com. Thank you, Greg. Closing comments for the people.
Yes, absolutely. So it's not lost on me for those folks that are listening and watching this. Not everybody can get in this chair. Okay. I know how high Kevin Spann's standards are. And so I really appreciate the fact that I'm getting a chance to hang out with you and have this conversation and really build our friendship. But make no mistake about it. Anybody that this man lets sit in this chair, they are vetted. So I feel vetted and I feel affirmed, my brother. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
You got it.
Greg Gray.